Shekhar, first of all, it's a pleasure to have you here. And, as Nidhi mentioned earlier, ardent fan of what you write and what you say in your programs. So, the audience here is a mix of both family offices, domestic large investors, and some international investors as well. And I'm going to split our conversation into sort of two parts, I would say. One is the political scenario and the way our politics is currently stacked up. And the other is the geopolitics of how India is going to be impacted. So let me start with the first question, which is, would you say that the present leadership of Mr. Modi is a reformist leadership, or is it going with the flow? Because there was some discussion with regard to freebies being called as Revadi, but has that got consumed in the political realities for the present?
Well, it was a good sign when he called freebies Revadis, but then he's now, he has the largest, if all of India's Indian politics has become now a supermarket of Revadis, then Mr. Modi has the biggest shop there. So this is very tempting for politicians because, anything which has to show tangible results over time, economic growth, jobs, building a lot of infrastructure, all that's painstaking, all that has some downsides. You will rub some people the wrong way. In every growth, there'll be some losers. In fact, if you look at the history of democracies, many leaders who bring about great growth in one term lose. Why? Because a rising tide lifts all boats, but it lifts the yachts first, right? So the rich get richer, the poor don't get poorer. But the poor feel poorer in comparison with the rich who become much richer. And then they think, this hasn't worked for me. It's worked for everybody, right? It's worked for everybody. But people make comparisons. And they say, my neighbor, my acquaintance, so-and-so is doing better. So growth creates inequality. And politicians are scared of inequality. Because then those who think they've got left behind are many more than those that think we've really done well. And those that think we've really done well rarely go out to vote. Once look at the Malabar Hill voting percentages, the lowest in the country consistently. So politicians have compulsions, and it's a very brave politician who carries out real reform. If you look at the history of the last 10 years, since your perspective is 10 years, 10 years have seen the rise of many oligarchies in India. So you see some big business groups in India, but very little else. If you go back to the reform of 1991, notionally, if there were 30 companies then that made the Nifty, the Sensex, of those companies, not more than 8 are in the Sensex now. And of the 30 companies, I don't have the exact, all of you will know with the exact numbers. I think about more than a dozen companies have ceased to exist. That is what real reform does, because real reform, if it brings in real capitalism, brings about capitalist creative destruction. Without creative destruction, there can be no capitalism. If you keep on putting oxygen, it's the same punctured tire. You keep on putting more air into it, it will go another couple of miles. But in the Modi government, after the initial talk and some changes, I think a decision was made that it's better to do things incrementally here and there. So there is a fair bit of governance reform. I would say bankruptcy process, it's not by no means perfect, but whatever has happened is reform.
But divestment is still at the back burner.
Pardon me?
Sale of public sector units is still.
Yes, but sale of public sector units, I think, once again, our expectations are set too high. We should have gone by Mr. Modi's record in Gujarat. He never privatized any public sector company. Even when Vajpayee and Arun Shourie was privatizing PSUs, there was not even a whisper of a Gujarat PSU being privatized. So we should have known. But, he made a speech during the pandemic that government will now get out of all business except in strategic sectors, right? as we stand, I don't know if something's happened over the past few months, but how many of you are old enough to have used a physical film in a camera? Not that many. In any case, it's been more than 2 decades since anybody's used a physical film in a camera. So there was a time when Government of India decided कि यार बड़ी शर्म की बात है, इंडिया में जितनी फिल्म आती है वो एक्फा से आती है या कोडेक्स से आती है, बाहर से हम अपनी फिल्म बनाएंगे. So they set up a company called Hindustan Photo Films. Indu was the brand name. Indira Gandhi was the prime minister, so very apt brand name. Since she was busy destroying India's economy through socialism, then why not name it after her? That plant hasn't made a film, God knows, forever. Nobody has used a film, God knows, forever. The plant is still there. Employees are still there. You know, you had Kolar gold fields in India. The last bit of gold that was taken out of India was God knows when. That field is there. Some employees are there. Employees' housing is still there, right? You can't touch it. And I have people in the mining business saying, "वो जैसा है उसको auction कर दो. With new technologies, we will mine gold from there. Given the combination of new technologies and gold price, we will find gold from there. India imports all its gold." But nobody, for a government with a majority, the third term, not to show the courage to do any of this, I would say is a cop-out. And it's a big disappointment. It's in the RSS system that they've always said, when they used to criticize Mrs. Gandhi and before that Jawaharlal Nehru. I'm saying the RSS system because the party has changed names. It was Jansangh earlier, Bharatiya Jansangh, now BJP. They used to say, "Jis desh ka raja vyapari, uski praja bhikhari," right? But see now what's happening. You had this big celebration. Oh, minister, ever since he's taken over, BSNL turned profitable.
Yeah.
Then when you check, there is no profit from any operations. Do you know, does anybody know anybody who uses a BSNL phone? Right? I don't think so. There was a time when Arun Shourie was communication minister, and Arun Shourie being Arun Shourie, he told me in Punjabi, "Tu na BSNL the phone le le." So I said, "Why?" He said, "Ik tu rakh le." I said, "Kyun?" He said, "All the others, they tap illegally. But BSNL is a government organization. Government organization, those guys are babus. They'll say, "Mere paas home secretary ka clearance lao. Otherwise, I'll not let you tap." But if these guys go and sit in Airtel's office, they'll say, "Le lo." If they go to Vodafone, they'll say, "Le lo." यहाँ पे मेरा union वाला manager बैठा है.
That's why आपका spam calls आ रहा है.
So the fact is that it's a big disappointment. If you look at this year's budget, there is a very large allocation made for further investments into PSUs.
Yeah.
This is really throwing, and people say, "Oh, but this plant is profitable." And I say, "But is there something called ROI?" But I will tell you what, the biggest problem also is ignorance in public debate, but also especially among journalists. Because that then get translated into public debate. Profitable company. If you ask people that, do you know at what price does SAIL make steel compared to Tisco or Jindal? Nobody knows anything. But purpose of public sector is also to create jobs. Then udhar bhi revdi de do. So it's also our mindset and psychology. And it's for politicians to change it. Only politicians change it. And I think Mr. Modi had started 11 years back. If he had persisted with it, by this time we should have seen more change. But at the same time, I look at the positives. I think for this country to even accept the idea of bankruptcy, that people can go bankrupt, and despite going bankrupt, they don't have to turn up in sackcloth and ashes. Right. They can live normal, rich lives despite being bankrupt. Otherwise, Trump would not be who he is. He's had how many bankruptcies? So those are the issues which are sort of problematic.
Right. So when you move on and you mentioned about the change in the Sensex, and of course, the fact that Modi, even though in his third term, he's a great conjurer of terminologies and catchwords. Atmanirbharta is the other one that has got in popular conversation in the last few years. Atmanirbharta is a geopolitical compulsion. or is it an economic policy? Particularly, and I read your piece on defense a couple of days ago, where you alluded to the change in which, change in the manner in which India is sort of spending its money on defense. And given the very friendly neighborhood that we have, it will be useful for my guests to hear your perspective on how that is actually going to play out in the context of where we are.
Well, first of all, Atmanirbharta is great, but Atmanirbharta doesn't mean that I have to reinvent the wheel always. Since we talked about defense, look at the Chinese. They are now producing 5G aircraft at industrial scale, J-20s. So much so that they are now coming up with a variant J-31, they are offering it to Pakistan for exports. They are making J-16s, which is 4.5 generation, and JF-17s, which they are making in collaboration with the Pakistanis, which Pakistan is also exporting, by the way, while we are fighting to get our next Tejas. How have the Chinese done it? Because Chinese have no ego. Chinese have no ego, and Chinese don't have to say कि मैंने ये बनाया है. Chinese bought from Russia, and with no ego, with great humility, reverse engineered it. Right? Nobody said you have to make your own. Just reverse engineer. They reverse engineered it at a much lower cost. And there are some particular materials and things which go into these engines, which Russia has. So they bought some of it. Then they bought some of the resources in Africa, so they can get some of that. So just by reverse engineering, China has now got to that stage that they can sustain themselves, they can sustain North Korea, they can sustain Pakistan, and in some ways, indirectly, they can sustain Russia because they give Russia the softer stuff, chips and things. So the problem in India is that we think Atmanirbharta means government should be Atmanirbhar. The government doesn't trust the private sector. So you have private sector manufacturers who are making excellent artillery guns. I see Kalyani, I see L&T, which is doing something with the government. But L&T also gets orders like 100 guns at a time. Right? 100 guns at a time, you cannot build any economies of scale. And you don't know who will change what tomorrow. But there are good changes. At least Indian companies are allowed to export. Even if the Indian system will not buy, they can export. So there are some of these changes which are good, but they should be trust in the private sector with the big systems. And let them find their joint venture partners. Because
you also made a comment on the amount that the government is spending
on
defense.
Yeah, I will come to that. Because there's no shame in finding a joint venture partner. You don't have to say, I made it all myself, right? So somebody said to me the other day, oh, Indian bomb, nuclear bomb is all fully made by us. Pakistani bomb is mostly imported from China and Korea, so ours is better. So I said, is there any special pleasure in being vaporized by a Chinese-made bomb than by an Indian, then killing somebody by an Indian-made bomb? You get vaporized nevertheless. So on defense spending, when you say Atmanirbharta, it's not just a question of what weapon systems you make. It's what you can afford to buy. If you look at your defense budget, and this year, unfortunately, because, see, all governments don't like, no government likes to give too much data, but this government has creepingly held back a lot of data. So this year's budget, for the first time, did not give you the breakup of Army, Navy, Air Force. It was always done. So we don't know how much is allocated to whom for capital budget, but still, pensions is the highest element in the defense budget. Yeah. Salary is the second highest. Capital budget is just about 86,000 crores, which is what? Maybe 10, 12 billion dollars. It's nothing. That's the reason we've been saying that a country like India, given the neighborhood in which we live, and if you have pretensions to being Atmanirbhar, and if you have pretensions not to fight war, but to prevent war, the best way to fight a war is to not having to fight it. So do we have a deterrent capacity? A deterrent capacity vis-a-vis China has to be that, look, you cannot take any territory from us, because if you do, you will pay so much price in attrition. That's what Ukraine imposed on Russia with help from the West, but Ukrainian soldiers fought. So can you impose enough attrition on the Chinese to deter them? Remember, the Chinese have the second generation of single child families. The family has a son, they lose the son, there is no brother, sister, nephew, niece, uncle, aunt, nobody, right? You are all by yourself. So can you, if you can convince the Chinese that look, आप ले लोगे 2-4-5 किलोमीटर, लेकिन आपके 10,000-20,000 लोग मर जाएंगे. Can you afford it? I don't think we've got to that deterrent level yet with the Chinese. With the Pakistanis, the deterrent is, you guys make a mischief anywhere in India, we'll come and punish you. It'll be a punitive raid of the kind, say, the Israelis carry out, and you will be able to do nothing. Do we have that punitive capabilities? No. And we were shown up Balakot and after. So that there has to be a positive capability difference between us and Pakistan, a punitive difference on our side, and the Chinese side has to be deterrent. And you don't get a deterrent by buying 25 Apache helicopters, of which 8 will go to the army and 17 will go to the Air Force, right? Yeah. I mean, if the point of the Apache, such a powerful, expensive system, is to turn the balance on the ground of one battle, then you will need all 25 operating in one battlefront. That's the reason I use the example of Hamleys. It's like the parents tell a kid, beta, you got 10,000 rupees, this is Hamleys, go buy what toys you want. So kid will say, ek mujhko ye chahiye, ek mujhko ye chahiye, ek mujhko ye chahiye. It will not add up to anything. And that's what's happening to our defense. So when you have a doctrine, you have a plan, terrain denial to China, punitive deterrent for Pakistan, then you can work in that direction.
Right now, there is no such thing.
But no, that's why that's why 2019, when Balakot happened and your planes went up, next day the Pakistanis came to challenge you, you could not wrestle with them because your missiles had too short a range. So see what the air chief said the other day at this India Today conclave. He said that he was asked if the Pakistanis get fifth generation aircraft, will you buy some? So he said, we'll see what happens because we can't afford to have a capability gap. Yeah. And he said there was a capability gap that came up earlier because Pakistanis got their beyond visual range missiles. Yes. And because we didn't have them, we felt that gap. Now with the Rafales, we filled it. So that's what happened after Balakot. The Sukhois that went up, their missiles had a range of 15-20 kilometers. Pakistani F-16s were firing AMRAAMs at them from 100 kilometers. So these Sukhois had to stay away. So that is for a country like India, 8 times Pakistan's, 10 times Pakistan's economy, 12 times Pakistan's defense budget. Why do we get caught in this? That's because of this minimalism and the Hamleys mindset. And that's what I was referring to.
You had a very interesting number there. You had compared something with Reliance. Just
yeah, so everybody says, oh, you are importing so much defense equipment. India is the largest importer of military equipment. That's nonsense because India is the 4th largest army in the world. The 3 largest before India don't import anything, right? Americans don't import anything. The Chinese don't import anything, right? Who imports anything? So India imports, and India is the 3rd or the 4th largest, depending on how you're counting, depending on how you count the Russians, right? Russians are not importing anything because they have their own industries, but their military industrial complex came into being a very long time back when they were not poor countries, right? And China did copy-paste from the Russians with no sense of embarrassment. In our country, we say, "Apna jab tak nahi banaya." The fact is that, you know, since we are on this, I know we are short of time, but HAL has made 200 plus copies of Sukhoi 30 MKI, right? HAL has made 200 plus Jaguars. Jaguar is a 1970s aircraft. The first Jaguars were ordered by Morarji Desai in 1978, when most people in this hall were not even born, right? That's one of those crashed day before yesterday near Ambala in Haryana. So HAL has made 200 of those. HAL has made about 600, if not 1,000 of MiGs of various kinds. 21, 23, 27, 21, 77, M, MF, Bison, everybody. But can they make one of these aircraft on their own? They still can't. They still will need a kit coming in from the Russians or for Jaguar coming in from Britain and France. So this is, I mean, HL is a great company, but I think these are, all monopolies are bad, right? But the worst monopolies are the government monopolies. And they become even worse when they have only one captive client, and that captive client is also the government. So you have defense PSUs owned by the government, only selling to the government. And who's the victim? Victim are the armed forces, because armed forces have no competitive bids. If they have to buy an aircraft of Tejas class, can they ask 5 manufacturers? No, ye apna hai. So that is the trap in which we are caught. And some of this is old, I would say, old hypocrisies that we have inherited from, not even so much from Nehru era, but from Indira era, which I was hoping that this government, because they are ideologically so opposed to Indira Gandhi and Nehru, they will reverse it. But increasingly, I find that this government is opposed to Nehru ideologically. They are not so opposed to Indira Gandhi ideologically.
Power corrupts. Look, I understand that, we do have some time. I don't go by that clock. We'll extend that. No conversation with you is going to be, and no conversation in a forum like this is ever going to be complete without the Donald coming into the picture. And given that what, Dennis the Menace or Donald the Menace for the world right now, and his equation with Modi, and how is that, what are you reading into that equation, and what do you foresee as the India-US political economic landscape as you see it?
See, first of all, let's get the personal equation business out of the way. Donald Trump does not have a personal equation with anybody except himself, right? Not even with Elon Musk, right? At some point, I'm sure people are going and telling him, oh, everybody thinks he's the president, right? In every darbar, this happens, any feudal darbar, and I'm sure it's happening. And at some point, his wife will say this to him, his daughter will say this to him, his son-in-law will say this to him. So Donald Trump only loves himself. So don't buy this hype that Donald Trump and Modi have a great personal equation. In any case, these days, in international relations, personal equations don't work, because international relations are transactional. Every leader is hard as nails, and they work in their own supreme national interest. So we have to see what is it that works for India that also works in America's interest and Trump's interest, because he will act in his own interest and secondary to his country's interest, first in his own interest. So if he can say, oh, I got India to drop tariffs by this much on this, he wants to be able to say it because that's good for votes. Second, Donald Trump, the worries, tariffs and all, I hope Trump forces us to drop tariffs, because reduction of tariffs was the most important part of the 1991 reform. And it was to block that my late friend Rahul Bajaj set up the Bombay Club, right? And even the minority government of P.V. Narasimha Rao was able to resist it, right? And tariffs were dropped, and tariffs continued to be dropped, because after that, then Chidambaram, as the United Front finance minister, further dropped them, and Yashwant Sinha dropped them big time. So, in fact, Yashwant Sinha said, I will align them with the ASEAN rates. So that process was reversed in the Modi era.
Correct.
And partly because some of India's oligarchs got around him and his system. And they all said कि हमारी manufacturing खत्म हो जाएगी, right? अभी आप देखो performance अपना. I can't give you the exact data right now, and I won't Google because I'll be wasting time. But generally, the share of manufacturing in India's GDP today is considerably lower than it was in 2014, right? So what did not work in the past will not work today and will not work in the future. Protectionism has never worked. What you need to do is fix your labor laws. You had good labor codes, but then you lost nerve and didn't implement them. You need large garment parks in India which employ 50,000, 100,000 people based on orders. Can you do that? Can you let women work at night? No, you can't. So ask anybody who makes garments, can you run 2 shifts for a worker? No, we can't. But you know what? In my area, there are 5 garment factories. So my guy works 1 shift in my factory, then he goes to the next one, works 1 shift there. So each factory can have 2 shifts. So if we were able to do some of that reform, that's painful, and it's more detailed. It's like test cricket. You need patience, right? And there will be tough moments. So I will give you a tiny cricket story. The series in Australia that India was losing, those days India used to lose all series in Australia. This time, unfortunately, we lost 3-1, but last 2 we won. But earlier one, and we used to lose 5-0, 4-0. So last test, we had lost all the tests. Last test, I think, was it Brisbane or someplace, or Adelaide. And the ball was really flying. Brett Lee's peak. And that was Dravid's last series. And that was the one innings where Dravid was at least staying on, and everybody else was falling. And I think he batted 5 hours to get 49 and got out. The guy batting with him was Virat Kohli. Virat Kohli had failed so much until then that the presumption was that if he fails once again, he'll be dropped. So Virat Kohli later said, I had one of these express addas with him, and very early days, and he said that, I said, you were having conversations with Rahul Dravid. What were you discussing? So Rahul Dravid said to me that this is test cricket. There will be tough phases in test cricket. Test cricket is all about surviving those tough phases. Because if you do, something will happen. The ball will get old. The bowler will get tired. The pitch will ease up. You will start seeing the ball better. Your nerve will settle down. And that's when Virat Kohli got 100. And the legend of Virat Kohli built up from there. So leaders have to be willing to survive the tough phases and take risks. I'm hoping now that Trump really forces India to cut tariffs. So that forces Indian industry to become competitive instead of just thinking that ठीक है यार कुछ नहीं होगा तो अगली बार electoral bonds में मैं और 4 हम सारे मिलके cartelize करके 500 करोड़ दे के आएंगे तो steel के ऊपर duties और बढ़ा देंगे ये हुआ ना right? So we are buying the most expensive steel in the world right now, and who's buying? Railways are buying. Indian armed forces, when they build bunkers, are buying this, right? People who make cars are buying this. So these are all self-defeating. You should do the right thing, right? You should do the right thing, and if you reform, thoda bahut rona dhona to hoga. But you know what? If the established players don't, if they change, they will do well. If they don't change, they will die, and others will come in. Because people of India have not gone away anywhere. No, consumers haven't gone away. So it's a pet peeve with me. So I got an opportunity. I am venting.
Thank you. One more item, which is from an Indian investor point of view, is energy security. Now, from an energy security point of view, while we have, our purchases from Russia are well known, and I saw your piece on our new Bappi Chappi love with Qatar. Just for your reference and information, we do have both the Qatar Sovereign Wealth Fund and the Abu Dhabi Sovereign Wealth Fund as investors with us. And now in the latest policy, the government has opened up the door for small nuclear energy plants. And nuclear treaty was something that former Prime Minister Manmohan Singh was willing to lay his government down to actually get it through. Where does all of this sit in with the energy security as it will play out going forward, given the dynamics of both oil and otherwise?
How do I keep it short, but I will try. India today has a per capita income of $2,800. Over the next 10 years, whatever happens, this will go to about $4,000, if not more, right? Actually, given how slow India's population growth rate is, it will go to 4,000 faster, because number of people is not growing that fast. Once as India moves towards $4,000 per capita, can you imagine how much India's energy consumption will go up? So all of these surplus energy producers in the world will look at India as a market. So if we think, oh, all the arms bazaar, somebody wants to sell us fighter planes. Hamara sara defense import in a year on an average in the 10 Modi years is $2.3 billion per year. This is 5% of what Reliance Industries imports in a year, right? And we get so neurotic, import ho gaya, import ho gaya. It is one-fourth of India's fertilizer imports in any year, right? So but the world is not chasing you to sell fighter planes, but the world is chasing you to sell energy. Because energy economies are dependent on selling energy. If Putin doesn't sell energy, Putin does not survive in power. If Saudi Arabia does not sell energy, Muslim Brotherhood will come out on the street and take over Saudi Arabia. Why would they let this continue? Because Muslim Brotherhood is a real danger in those areas, right? What happened when we had Arab Spring and elections? Muslim Brotherhood came to power, no, in Egypt and places, and we know the consequences. So there is energy producers are looking for markets. India is a very good market for energy producers. And so I will not worry so much. I'll see this as an opportunity. In fact, if Trump goes the way he's going, if he goes and embraces Putin, that's his problem and America's problem. Why should we care? And if it opens up Russian energy supplies, Russian energy, Russian gas, it will be very positive for, there are many negatives, but that will be very positive for India because freer energy markets are very good for India. In fact, I don't know the technology of this, but I sometimes think that all the EVs we produce is actually a direct capital transfer to China. Because every EV has stuff coming in from China. So why don't we make an intermediate transition? Go from go to LNG first, right? Produce electricity from LNG, run cars on gas, and then go to EVs. But I don't know enough science there, so I can only talk. But energy, India is a growing consumer, and whether it's Qatar, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Venezuela, the US, Canada, Russia, all of them need the Indian market.
Right, so we're just about getting closed out, but let me circle back to domestic politics. 3 terms of the Modi government is, we're halfway through the 3rd term now. What is the competitive landscape? Is there anybody in the horizon that you see as an observer who has the charisma and the, the oratory skills of Modi? Or is it going to be Modi, Shah, Yogi going forward?
Look, all you guys invest in futures, right? Futures and options. You also hedge, right? So in politics, you can't do futures and options, nor can you hedge. You can only look at the past. So looking at the past in Indian politics, once you have a strong leader in power, a strong leader is never defeated by a rival. A strong leader always has to defeat themselves. And why do I say themselves instead of himself? I use complex pronouns for the simple reason that the strongest leader who defeated herself was Indira Gandhi. Because when she called elections in 1977, she had never thought she was going to lose. She only called elections, withdrew the emergency because everybody had told her that she was going to sweep everything. Right? So she defeated herself because people were so angry. Nobody had told you who will be Prime Minister. In fact, even after she was defeated, the newly formed Janata Party fought for many days to decide who should be Prime Minister. And because they were never able to settle that issue, that they fell very soon. Rajiv Gandhi, with 413 seats, which became 418 in the end, who defeated him? He defeated himself. The party whose Prime Minister then ruled after him only got 143 seats.
Yeah.
And he was not even pronounced as leader of that party, VP Singh. So Rajiv Gandhi defeated himself. Manmohan Singh, not a strong leader, UPA, but they had done better in 2009 than in 2004, so they were on an upswing. Who defeated them? They defeated themselves because the party turned on the government. So I've often said that this was a case of UPA and Congress parties of UPA suffering from an autoimmune disease when a party starts eating its own government,
Yeah.
right? So in India, big political change, when you have a strong incumbent in power, only comes like that. And that applies to states also. So let us see. I'm not saying this will happen or that will happen. I think there is still 4 years. So don't play this out. Don't war game as if Rahul Gandhi comes up against Modi. Some things in Indian politics that never change. One thing that hasn't changed is think about it. 2014 election, Congress party got 44 seats. 2019 election, Congress party got 52 seats. 2024 election, Congress party got 99 seats, right? What was Congress party's vote percentage in each one of these? It was the same. It was 20%, right? This time they got more seats because they had they had arrangements for the other parties. So 1 out of 5 Indians votes for the Congress party blindly, in spite of Rahul Gandhi being the leader, right? 1 out of 5, right? In fact, if you take BJP out, no other 7 parties in India, together, either in UPA or NDA, have 20% vote share. So if Congress party were a startup, how valuable would this capital be? Right? So that's the reason I have sometimes written that what the Congress party needs, they've got capital, they've got a great brand, they've got a legacy. What they need is a shareholders' revolt, right? A shareholders' revolt or a management buyout. So who knows what happens in Argentina? Javier Milei came from nowhere. He don't even have a party.
Yeah.
So I think India is also waiting for a Javier Milei kind of character, a libertarian, who says left, right, center, sub, nonsense, right? I'll do things in a different way. It will take time, but I think India is getting ready for that as people are getting more educated. And that's why you will find more and more religion being used, because religion right now is the only ideology. Left and right business is over.
Thank you. I will end it by saying that after the World Championship win yesterday, Modi called Rohit Sharma to congratulate him. Rohit Sharma said, oh, we won because of Rahul. Modi said, same here, same here. So with that, I will, thank you for being here. I know we run out of time. Nidhi, can I just take a couple of questions? Yeah. Anybody? Shekhar, they're all spellbound.
No. That's not very nice. Somebody should ask a question.
Yeah, Anuj.
So first of all, thank you so much for a great session. Loved it. I'm here.
Yeah.
So what is disheartening to actually know from this session is that the government is actually not trying for the major changes what the nation needs. My question is going to be related to that only. If probably you were the Prime Minister, what could be the 3 major changes you would have done for this country, for the country to grow and become the developed nation in future?
Well, I think it's a very dangerous question even to answer. Even to say,
Sir,
what
sir,
if...
BJP wala koi nahi hai yahan pe.
What if I were be to be the Prime Minister? That's very dangerous. No. So let me just say that, for a leader who was not worrying about the next state election, who had 4 years, right? The first thing I will do is go back to whatever I have said and start implementing those things. So what I said on the public sector, right? Why is the government sinking so much capital in the public sector? The government should get rid of these assets, get this money, and use that money for whatever, even to shore up your defense, instead of increasing your deficit. Number 2, you had the labor codes. Make it a mission mode thing. Implement those labor codes. Number 3, go back and again talk to the farmers. Because if Trump is going to say that also no protection for agriculture. If you modernize your agriculture, it actually will be very good for you.
Yeah.
Because India can produce genuine agricultural surpluses. Right now we produce too little surplus. Too few of our farmers produce any surplus. The rest are just sitting in the villages and wasting time. So once again, it needs for leaders, and this is a very popular leader, a leader to go from place to place with the message saying you don't have to grow wheat and rice, as is happening in Punjab and Haryana, and increasingly now in Madhya Pradesh as well. You don't have to do this wheat and rice. There is enough in the world of wheat and rice. You grow all the value-added stuff because you are skilled farmers. Right? Skilled farmers are not found in most parts of the world, particularly the developed world. Because if in India, people are giving up farming and moving to cities, can you imagine what's happening in Europe or what's happening in the US or Canada? So a leader has to do these 3-4 things. And then finally, it's very important, keep the social cohesion. Because whatever happens in India, India will move forward. The only thing that can pull India back or slow India down if it loses social cohesion. That social cohesion is very important. See what's happening in Syria. In Syria, Shias can't live with Muslims. Jiska mauka milta hai, dusre ko marta hai, right? Both can't live with Yazidis, right? Now you find Sunnis can't live with Alawites. They are massacring them. They've killed their Christians. They've killed their Jews. In India, India is the most diverse. It's just I'll take 1 minute. Since 1945, Second World War ended, decolonization came, and all of the world was restructured. In that process of all the new nations that emerged, only 2 have remained intact. Only 2. One, Tanzania, but I have not quite studied why. But the second is the largest and the most diverse, that's India. You tell me any other nation, it's broken up. Pakistan broke up into 2. Even Indonesia lost East Timor, right? Yugoslavia broke up into so many that if you ask me, I will fail a UPSC quiz, right? I just saw the other day that I think Italy didn't qualify for the World Cup because East Macedonia defeated them. Then I discovered East Macedonia also has a team, and they are a country, broke out of Yugoslavia. Czechoslovakia broke up. Soviet Union broke up. Everybody broke up, but we did not. We become stronger by the decade. Every decade we become stronger because we know how to live with each other, right? We don't particularly want to follow someone else's faith, or speak someone else's language, but we are quite happy, and there is a sense of a larger Indian identity. That's very important because it will be very bad if we now try to put it all in a mixer grinder and homogenize it. So that has to stop because India must keep its social cohesion. You know, people say India needs unity and diversity. I think it's the opposite. India needs to celebrate diversity. So for me, that's the 4th thing, but that probably is the most important.
Shekhar, we really run out of time. I would have, from that point, I would have loved to take the conversation forward on the Uniform Civil Code and how it would impact, but then we will just go on and on. I appreciate your coming here. Thank you so much, and thanks for everybody to be a patient listener. Thank you.